Greetings viewers and welcome back. In this video I'm going to cover basing your models. If you've reached this point by now, hopefully you've already decided on some kind of theme for your army that you've already incorporated into the paint job, and we're just going to add a little bit extra something to it so that the bases kind of match the idea of where your guys are coming from, whether it be an ice planet or some desert terrain or a forest or a swamp. As you're going to want to put a little bit of extra something underneath to kind of designate that your units are actually in that terrain, so you kind of represent the base with some snow or some foliage from a forest or whatnot. One thing that you can do when you're actually basing your models before you get to the point of actually painting or priming and painting them, you can kind of get some little bits. As you see on the Broodlord here, I have a Space Marine helmet that I've painted up in the Blood Angels scheme. You can easily get bits from other players or a friend of yours that maybe has a different army and some extra heads or pieces laying around from their particular models that they don't need. You can stick those on there before you prime the model, and you can kind of paint those as you go along with the model that you're painting. Just adds a little bit of extra something to it, such as, again, the Broodlord has that Space Marine helmet. He's kind of a little bit better than a generic troop, so I figured it'd be kind of nice to add something extra to his base. One other thing that you can purchase that's kind of nice and I found useful, which is actually where that Space Marine helmet came from, is the Warhammer 40k basing kit. I'm going to kind of show you what comes in that and give you a general idea of what you can do with it. It comes with 5 little tubs. They're about this same size here. 4 of them actually have stuff in it. One of them is empty in case you have extra bits laying around you want to use it for. 2 of the tubs are slate tubs. One of them is listed as the medium slate tub, and one of them is the small slate tub. They have different little bits of slate in here. The mediums, the ones are a little bit bigger size. This kind of just represents the actual terrain, such as kind of rocky, beat up terrain, or you could even use it like in an urban environment to represent maybe a busted up road or something. The smaller one is actually much smaller than those big chunks in the other one, and actually it kind of grinds itself down into dust rattling around in this container. Not very big, but still nice enough to add some texture to your models. The other 2 tubs that come in this kit are identical. They just have 40k basing small resin tubs. Each of the things that come in these are exactly the same as the other one. It has different size pieces in here that have little pieces of rocks and debris and things like melt-a-bombs and helmets from various armies, kind of busted up tubes and pipes and hoses. Things you can just add on there again to add a little bit of extra something to your model's bases. Another item that comes in with the tubs in the kit is this little brass sheet of pieces on here that kind of represents some metal plating and some grates and shot up metal bits. You can kind of bend these up as needed, put them on the base, and again, when you're priming your model, you more than likely want to have this on there at that point so you can kind of paint everything all at once instead of trying to add it on later, especially if you're using something like the sand that I'm going to show you in just a few minutes when I get into applying the basing material to your models. It makes it a lot harder to stick it on there, because if some of that sand comes loose, it doesn't have a good enough grip, this stuff will fall off and kind of make for a little bit of a pain in the butt after the fact. So it's always a good idea to put things like that on before you actually prime and paint your models. So my Tyranid army, I haven't quite decided yet if it's what the base theme is. I initially started doing this as kind of like a burnt up, desolate terrain, and then I've had some people kind of tell me that it looks more like a swamp. So I've kind of not really decided what it is, but I'm just sticking with it because I kind of like the way it's turned out and the way it looks. Basically what I do is I put black sand on the base. I'll apply a little bit of brownish colored slime, which I'll get into and show you once we're done putting the sand on there. And then I put a little bit of brown burnt grass from the Citadel static grass on there. And I'll kind of show you as we go along what it looks like and how to apply it, and then I'll show you a finished product with all those items that I mentioned on there. So let me get the camera reset up, and I'm going to go ahead and base this Gene Stealer and show you just kind of a basic way to get some kind of terrain effects on your models. Alright, we're back and I'm all set up. The main thing you're going to need for this is the white PVA glue that I showed you before. Any kind of Elmer's or white glue will work. Like I said before, you're going to want something that dries clear. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and squirt a little bit out on our little palette. Another reason to use those fine cast plastic trays. This is one from one of the old metal models, but I just use this for mixing up my glue. We're going to want to water it down a little bit because the glue on its own is quite thick. So you want to get it just a little bit thinned down so that it's easier to spread and move around on your model, and kind of holds the sand a little bit better rather than being all globbed up and adding a little bit of texture to it. So we just add a little bit of water, mix that up. takes a little bit to get it mixed up, but once you get it nice even coverage with the water versus the glue, very simple. Just get your brush. I use the same brush every time for this, just so I don't ruin one of my good paint brushes. So let me zoom in here so you can kind of see this a little better. Alright, so once we've got the glue on our designated brush that we're using for this, we're just going to want to spread it around on the top of the base here. I painted it black because I'm going to be using black sand. If you're doing perhaps snow or something, or even a desert, you're going to want to paint it kind of a white to match the snow, or brown for the desert sand. And that's just so that any parts that show through from the little grains of sand, it doesn't kind of look a little off peeking through your basing material, whatever you've decided to use. But we just want a nice even coverage of the glue over the top of the model. Try not to get it all over the rim. It's not a big deal if you do. You can always get the material that you're using to stick on there knocked off afterwards. It just makes a little less work for yourself if you make a less of a mess on there. So we've got the whole top of our base covered. As you can see, a nice even coverage of the white glue on there. And then again, I'm using black sand. So this is just my generic black sand that I picked up from the craft store. I just kind of dip the model straight into it. Kind of wiggle it around, make sure we get the whole top of it covered with sand. Kind of let the excess sand run off of it. I always do just give it a second dip just in case somehow I miss something. Make sure you get enough sand globbed on there. Anything that doesn't stick to the glue is going to fall right off. You can just knock it right back into your container that you keep your sand or your particular media you're using in. Give it a nice couple of hits to knock off all the excess that the glue didn't grab. And that's pretty much it. I mean, it's pretty basic for this. We just got the sand, got to let the glue dry on there. Or if you look closely at it as of right now, you can kind of see some white glue showing through the black sand. But again, that's why I use the glue that dries clear. So once that dries, you won't even notice it, and then any of the parts that do show through again with the black sand is just going to see the black paint that was underneath. So we're going to go ahead and let this dry, and I'm going to go ahead and get some of the other ones knocked out, and then I'm going to come back and I'll show you putting on the static grass, and then I'll go into the slime that I use for my other particular models. Alright, well I'm back, and the sand that I put on the base for my gene stealers is dry, so I'm going to move into showing you the static grass I mentioned earlier. And as far as putting that on the base is just to kind of give it a little extra touch and some more depth to the terrain that your particular models may be on. So I've already mixed up some of the glue from earlier, same thing, the white PVA glue, just add a little bit of water to it and mix it up in my little tray here. And the stuff I'm going to be putting on is the Citadel burnt grass. It's just static grass. It comes in a variety of colors. I believe I've showed it to you before. So I'm going to get this cracked open here. And it's going to be kind of the same procedure as before, except it's not, we're not going to do kind of a uniform covering of the whole entire base. I'm just going to put it kind of in a few select areas, just kind of randomly. I'm working on 5 of these guys right now, so I'll just show you one of them. I'm just going to kind of spread the glue around in little random areas on each one of their bases, and then I'll put the static grass on there. So we just get a little bit of glue on our brush and just again pick a random spot on the base where maybe some grass would be growing through or show up, different sizes as far as the area to cover on different models, and then just in different areas, just so that not all the bases for all your models look exactly the same. So we just put a little bit of glue, spread it out, 2 little areas there, and then I usually use some tweezers to grab this stuff rather than dunking the whole model in there. And it's kind of the same thing as the sand before, just kind of make sure you get the whole area where you've got all the glue at covered. I usually push it down just a little bit. They call it static grass because it'll actually stand itself up even if I'm smashing it down in there like that. I'm going to go ahead and knock off all the excess back into the static grass bucket, make sure we get all of it. And you can kind of see it sitting there on the base. It doesn't look that great now. Once it dries a little bit, the white will actually disappear again, just like the black sand from being able to see it through the grass, but all the grass has kind of stood up already on its own. And I'm just going to go ahead and start spreading some more glue on the other bases. As far as the models that I put what I call it slime, it's actually the water effects, which I'll show you when I go ahead and start applying that to the other models. I don't put it on any of these troops that I have for my Tyranids. They have these slotted bases where the models are actually attached through the top and go through the whole thing. No matter how many coats of paint or glue I've put on that, it still always seems to leak when I try to put the water effects on there, and it always leaks through on the bottom and ends up draining and kind of disappearing off of the base. So these little troops like this I don't use it on. I tend to use it on the bigger bases or the ones that are completely closed up and they don't have the slot in them. So these guys are just getting the sand and the grass. The ones that I put the slime on, I'll actually do the slime first and then put the grass on afterwards, just because when it starts to spread out, sometimes it gets in little areas where I don't want it to go, and if it gets on that static grass once it's on there, it kind of ruins the look and doesn't look as good. So if you plan on using it in the future, I would recommend definitely doing the static grass after you put the water effects on the base. So I'm going to go ahead and shut the camera off and get the other 4 of these gene stealers. Just going to put a little bit of grass on here just like I did this one, and when I come back again, I'm going to go ahead and start applying the water effects to the bases of some of my other models. Alright, well, back again. And as you see in front of you here, this bottle of the realistic water from Woodland Scenics. This is what I keep referring to as my slime. I'm not really sure why I call it that, but it's just water effects. The best thing about this stuff is you can actually use food coloring to change the color to whatever you want rather than having it dry clear just to have the regular appearance of water. So if you want it to be green for some kind of toxic waste or blue for water, whatever color you want to make it, it's very easy to just use random food coloring. This particular brand that I have came from Target, and it actually has a little bit of combination suggestions on the back here for different colors that you can add together to kind of create different colors. I actually used the one in the back here that's listed as chocolate malt for the stuff that I use on my bases, which I've already mixed up here in my little medicine cup where you kind of get these on the top of your cough syrup and all that. And then I'll use a toothpick to stir it. So I've already mixed up the color combination with the drops of the food coloring, and then pretty much all I need to do is add in my water effects here. One of the reasons I kind of use the measuring cup too is so that I pretty much add the same amount every time, so that I kind of, anytime I mix this up, I know how much I'm using versus the amount of color, so that it won't be too concentrated and maybe be a little bit darker or a little bit lighter. It always ends up coming out the same on any of the models. And because this does mix up quite a large amount of the slime, as I like to call it, I'll usually wait until I have several models that are waiting to actually be slimed before I'll mix this up. So they'll just be kind of sitting on the back burner waiting while I'm working on other stuff. So once I've got my food coloring in there, I pour in my realistic water, and as you can see, it came out to be a nice brown, nasty looking color here. So the food coloring works quite nicely to change that to whatever color it is that you decide you want to make it. And rather than pouring this onto the base of the model, I actually used a toothpick to kind of transfer it over, just because this stuff is kind of messy and I don't want it running down the lip as I'm trying to pour it and dripping all over the place and end up getting on my model where I don't want it. So on the base of this particular Broodlord, I have sand. And typically something else I should mention too, when I do the sand on the bases, which I intend to put slime on, I don't cover the whole thing. So as you can see in the front here, I have sand that covers about the front area, and then I just have this back area where I'm going to apply the slime. And again, it's the same thing as the static grass. I'll do it randomly for each different model. I won't try to put it in the same spot every time. I just kind of sporadically decide where it's going to end up. So I'm going to end up just putting it on this back portion here. Once you actually go to decide when you're going to use this stuff, if you decide to use it, make sure that the place you set it to dry, make sure that surface is level, because if it's not, the stuff is going to kind of shift towards wherever it feels like it needs to go, and you're going to end up with it kind of clumped up in one area. It's going to be really thin on the other side. So usually once I'm done putting the coat on all my models, I'll actually put some saran wrap over the top of this and stick it in the refrigerator. That way it won't dry, because typically this stuff will kind of spread out and thin a little bit and not look exactly like I want it. So I can just pop that stuff out of the fridge and kind of touch up the areas that need to be covered again. Or another good point about this stuff is, even if you have a surface of it that's dried, if you put some wet stuff on it, it bonds right to it. You can't even tell. It layers and kind of attaches itself basically to the material. I don't know what this stuff is made out of, but it is pretty cool. So like I said, I just use a toothpick and kind of get as much on there as I can, and just kind of start dripping it onto the base. It takes a little bit of time to get it right, but if you take your time doing it, it'll end up actually coming out nicely. And as you go, you can kind of use the toothpick to guide the slime where you want it to actually end up. and make sure it doesn't overflow off of the edges of your base. If it does, you can cover that up with paint later. It's not a big deal, but you kind of, again, save yourself a little bit of a headache in the end in terms of, again, creating extra work for yourself. So as non-messy as you can be, the better for your own good. So again, I'm just kind of using my toothpick to drip the slime on there and direct it where I need it to be. Kind of get there. So we've got our first Brood Lord is done. I've got several other models to use. Again, I'm not going to end up using all of this on there, so once I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and put that in the fridge and wait until this stuff has dried and I've gotten a chance to look at it, and then I can determine if it needs more, or I can go ahead and hold on to it for later for some more models, or I can go ahead and dump it out and start working on the next batch of models and wait till the next time I need it and mix up some more. So hopefully you found this video somewhat useful. If you did, please like the video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, something else you'd like to see in more detail, or you have anything else you'd like to know about, please leave a comment below. When I come back in the next video, I'm going to go over Army transport and storage options, so please stay tuned for more videos, and thank you for watching.